We're taking up water faster than it can be replenished, and so we are now using the next level of water.
If we say absolutely no to all exports, it's a pretty strange position to take in a world where water is treated like a commodity. The fact is that there are shortages and there are surpluses.
What's happening is that there's a creation of a global water cartel taking place, very, very like the energy cartel that now exists, so that one day, possibly, when a new find of water is discovered, it's owned before it's taken out of the ground by a company.
To bring you this story, we've combed through the TVO archives to find out how the growing demand for fresh water is affecting the environment and politics.
We all learned back in about grade 5 that there's a closed hydrologic cycle. We're not supposed to run out, and we haven't run out technically. The water's somewhere, but we can't get at it or we've destroyed it. Here's the story really briefly. We have polluted, humanity has polluted, particularly in the third world, surface water that people used for millennia. So you don't have that river or lake. 80% of China's surface water is polluted beyond use. 75% of India's water, just as 2 examples. So we are using modern technology with these huge high-tech bores, and we are boring down into the groundwater. We're taking up water faster than it can be replenished, and so we are now using the next level of water. And we're also taking water from where it exists in nature, in those aquifers or in watersheds, and we're watering deserts, and then you create a second desert. So we're creating huge amounts of desert. Or we use it to water huge cities, which then dump it into the ocean, so you're not returning it to the cycle. You will read over and over that we have 20% of the world's available water. This is not true. The only way this would be true is if we drained every lake and every river in Canada, and then we would be a big desert. We have about 6.5% of the available fresh water. And even that's not quite accurate, because 90% of us live in the south and we have about 2.5. The rest of it's in great big rivers that run north into the north, and to get at that water would mean reversing the flow of that water, which would mean huge engineering projects the size of Three Gorges Dam, which you want to think about real carefully before you do it.
Well, frankly, the fact is that if we say absolutely no to all exports, it's a pretty strange position to take in a world where water is treated like a commodity. The fact is that there are shortages and there are surpluses, and Canada does have, despite what Maud would have us believe, we do have surpluses of water. We have enough water to sell at a reasonable level. We can't sell tons and tons of this stuff. We have to keep enough to protect the watershed. But it is marketable. There's sort of a myth that if we sell our water, it's all going to go to golf courses in Arizona or someplace. Most of the water that is brought into the southwestern United States or the Midwest, where they have shortages, is used for agriculture. That grows food, which we import. We import about 60% of what the U.S. produces, which lowers our food bills. So essentially, if we did export water to the States, we'd be the beneficiary.
The Americans have never approached us for water. Most of these proposals have come from Canadian entrepreneurs. Generally Canadian entrepreneurs that don't understand the situation and the economics. The energy costs alone, the pumping costs, would be larger than any possible revenues you could get. The capital costs would be larger than the budget of the whole government of Canada for several years. There was a study done by the Policy Research Institute of the federal government last year, and they concluded that the only business case that could be made for large-scale export is for consultants to make a lot of money from governments doing studies of feasibility studies.
What has happened is, because water is so scarce and because there are so many of us needing it and chasing it, it has become extraordinarily valuable. So what's happening is that there's a creation of a global water cartel taking place, very, very like the energy cartel that now exists, so that one day, possibly, when a new find of water is discovered, it's owned before it's taken out of the ground by a company.
Many of the wars of this, he was talking about the 20th century, were about oil, but the wars of the next century will be about water. War over water in this century, what do you think?
Well, conflict, certainly conflict. And I think even today there are more water refugees than there are war refugees. There are hundreds of millions of people in the world that are now dependent on groundwater that the rains are no longer replenishing. In large areas of India that are dependent on local groundwater, they've just abandoned the hundreds and hundreds of thousands of square miles because there's no longer any water for them to live on. They've just abandoned it and moved elsewhere. It's also true in northern China and many other places in the world.
Water does not belong to anybody. It belongs to the earth, all species, and is a fundamental human right. It belongs to future generations as well, and that we will stop destroying it or we're all going to die. Nobody should be allowed to appropriate water for profit. It's not like cups or tables or running shoes. You can't live without it, and it is part of our public commons. It's a public trust.